This week's episodes were brought to you by the generous support of Eric Sumner. Hey folks, Quill18 here, and welcome to another episode of our mostly civilized Hex Engine video series here in Unity. Last episode, we implemented sort of like a mouse-based selector for our movement, but it's actually not entirely what we're looking to do, because right now, as soon as we click on this unit, it gets selected, and then we just mouse over, and it puts the line. But that's not actually exactly how I want it to work. So I want to tune our mouse controller to behave a little bit more like I want. The other thing I would like to do is do a pass of the terrain system so that the hexes are actually aware of what kind of tile they are, because right now they don't really. It gets all set up in the map part of things, and that feels blah. Yeah, that, and then we're going to probably work on some user interface stuff. We're probably going to make sure that the turn sequencing works okay. Then at some point, I think what we're going to do is we're going to create a settler type unit that can spawn a city, and then we'll get to play around with more user interface stuff like that. I don't know. We'll definitely not do all of those things in this video, but that's sort of the plan for things going forward. It's interesting that path stays there as well, so a little bit of cleanup. So I want to go into the mouse controller code, because right now we have it so that when you click on a unit, it selects the unit, which is fine, but then instantly goes into the unit movement mouse mode, which is not accurate. That's not what I want actually at all. Clicking on a unit should not actually change our mouse mode, right? Note, selecting a unit does not change our mouse mode. Instead, the thing that will change our mouse mode is something like else if we have a selected unit, if selected unit's not equal to null, and input.get mouse button 1 is, well, I guess we switch into this when it goes down. It sort of almost doesn't matter one way or another, but if so, we have a selected unit and we've pushed down the right mouse button, so enter unit movement mode. That's what I want over here. So that's all there is to it. Bam, like that. So now, that's a lot more, I think, what we want to go for. That's step 1 here. So now, run. I select this unit, no pathing. I hold down the right mouse button. Now I've got pathing over here. Release the right mouse button, no more pathing. And if I start to hit the space bar, our character will follow along there. So, we still need to make a couple of tweaks here because this path is still kind of wonkly wobbly, which is not what we're looking for. How do we want that path to show up, that pink path? I think what I want for the pink path is whenever a unit is selected, the path that it's supposed to walk should be displayed. Okay? And I think that path is sort of... Do we even need to keep the hex path over here? Is what I'm trying to think, because let's say, okay, you've selected a unit, you've given it some sort of movement command. Then you go and, deselect it and do something else, come back later, and you click on the unit. You want to be able to see that unit's path right away. So I guess my question is, do we actually need to keep the hex path in the unit movement? What happens if, let's say you've got a unit that's already got a path, you click it, and you click right-click somewhere else, and you start moving around? Is there any sequence of events, right? Imagine this dwarf already had a path to go left, and I select it, and I go here. Is there any sequence of events by which we would want to cancel this move and keep the old path intact? That's something I'm not sure about. I mean, I guess we could hit escape. I mean, escape always leaves any mode. We're still not cleaning up this line properly. Escape leaves any mode. Would it remember what it had before in that situation? I guess it probably should. So now we need to draw the line slightly differently based on a couple things. If we have a unit selected, by default, the line will just show the unit's current path. But if we're in the click drag mode, select unit, click drag mode, then it's going to show the possible future path. And then if we hit escape, it's going to deselect everything along the way. I guess that's fine. So I guess the way to do it is probably this hex path. So, okay, here's what we want. We want some sort of function. As part of update is just going to be, well, we already have a What do we have? Draw line, draw path, draw path. Let me take this, and just for convenience of planning what we're doing over here, I just want to move it underneath the update, just because I'm going to be looking in this area. Okay, it'll make it better for, I think, tutorial type things. So right now, draw path gets called when we are in the unit movement update mode. But that's not the only time I want to draw the path. In fact, I think I want to remove the call from draw path over here. Okay, unit movement mode, this is while we're holding down the right mouse button, is constantly updating this hex path array, which belongs to our mouse controller over here. And if we release the mouse button, then it tells the selected unit to set the hex path to this new route. I think what I want to do is over here in our update, because right now we're not calling draw path at all. But in my update, I think I want to do something like this. If selected unit not equals null, then I want to draw the path. Okay? And the path that we're going to draw is going to depend on whether hex path has anything in there. So what do I mean by that? I mean when we cancel our unit movement phase. Okay, so unit movement phase ends or gets we hit escape or whatever. When we do our cancel update func, which is our generic cleanup, and we can maybe clear selected units, but we're also going to want to set hex path at this point to be equal to null. Okay, so that'll be part of our mode ending cleanup. I still don't think that we want to well, we'll leave this in for now. We'll figure something out in a second. So if our selected unit's not equal to null, then what we do is we draw a path. But we're going to draw a path, and we have to pass it a path. So either we're going to say, so if hex path, this is the one that's being worked on. If this is not equal to null, then we are going to send, we're going to use the trinary little operator over here. We're going to pass hex path to the draw path function. Otherwise, so we might have a selected unit, but we're not working on a new hex path, in which case we want to send the selected unit's path. I don't think we've actually got an ability to get that right now. We can set the path, but we can't get it. So let's go ahead and take a look at unit over here. And I guess we'll just have a public get hex path. Now, technically, whatever gets this hex path could go and like rewrite some of the nodes in this array, but I think that's going to be fine. We'll figure out, whatever later on. So we're going to return, well, actually we couldn't, because this is going to return an array, a copy of the queue. So it's actually okay. So whatever gets returned by get hex path, if the calling function modifies this array, it's not going to make any changes to our actual unit's path. And I think that's actually much better for encapsulation. The only way to make a change to the unit's actual hex path is to call set hex path here, because we never return the queue object itself. We are doing maybe some needless of conversion from arrays to queues and from queues to arrays, and we'll figure that out in the future if we can optimize around that. But for now, I think it's a good level of encapsulation. So what we want to do is get hex path. So there we go. So if we're working on a new hex path in our UI, we'll pass that to draw path. Otherwise, we just pass the selected unit's current path. So, and what's nice about this, at no point do we modify the line renderer, right? The only time we turn the line renderer on and off is when draw path gets called. But we only call it if selected unit's not equal to null. So how do we want to turn off the path? I guess I could do it here, So I could say something at this point. Line renderer enabled false. I don't like that kind of level of encapsulation. I mean, it's still within the same class, so it's fine, but it feels like this is a little cumbersome. Maybe, you know what? Because I was like, oh, we could call draw path with an empty array. That will cause it to be cleared. Or, I mean, I suppose if this is equal to null or that. I think maybe that's the best way. I was going to make a function called like clear path or erase path or cancel path, but otherwise, if we just call draw path with a null, just like clear the path display, that's probably fine. Because that'll just turn off the render and end that. So if there's no selected unit, we're not drawing a path. All right, I think that's pretty clean-ish. That's fine. So we select the unit. Ooh. When we select the unit, we're trying to run get hex path, but this hex path here could be null at this point, which is, I guess, the situation. So it's something like, so if hex path is equal, I guess is equal to null. Either way, it doesn't really matter. Then we just return null. Otherwise, that's the correct trinary operator. Did I use it correctly on the other side? Yeah. Otherwise, we return the hex path array form. So we either return null or the hex path's array. So that should be okay. So again, we'll hit play. So when we select the unit, we are calling draw path, but we're sending it this unit's hex path, which is null, which means the draw path just turns off the line renderer and returns instantly. If I hold down the right mouse button, we'll enter into mouse pathing mode, and we'll say, oh, I want you to move over there. When I let go, currently it does deselect the unit, which is not what I think we want to do, but let's deal with that next. If I click on the unit again to select it, it should draw the old path from before. Ah, that's interesting. Right. When we assign a path to this unit, it automatically drops the first step, because it's like, well, this is the tile I'm in, so obviously I don't want to move here. But that means that our path drawing is all of a sudden kind of wonky. And really, I wonder if we want the logic to change here so that it still remembers the first tile, or the current tile that you're in is always... I suppose we could write the logic like that, right? So we've got this little thing in here when we set a hex path to DQ the first item, but let's not do that. I mean, really, it comes down to what is going to lead to the least resistance. What's going to be the most straightforward? Like, maybe it would be better if we just change our pathfinding system to not return the tile we're already standing in. Possibly. I mean, what we would do at that point, we would update draw path to add an extra hex, an extra position at the start of it, which is based on the hex we're already standing in. So what would actually happen? I think getting rid of that, we just randomly drop the first item from the hex path, is actually probably good overall. The only question is, are we going to redefine the unit's hex path to say the first item in the queue is always the tile we're standing in? In which case, we'd be using a lot more peaks, right? Because right now, when we do a turn, we instantly remove the hex from this. But, which I guess is fine. Because really, when we DQ it, this would mostly be like, we're DQing the hex we're already standing in, and then instead of moving to the new hex, like by DQing it, we just peek at the future one. Right? So it's something like, if we were to redefine hex path as saying the first tile is always the one we're standing in, then DQing is something like, actually, like, current hex, and then what we do, the new hex is actually gotten by peeking over here. So our hex path would always contain the tile we're in. I don't know if that makes more or less sense, keeps things more or less simple. I mean, I believe this is all it takes for us to fix this. So now, we never DQ the hex. Like, we only DQ when we're leaving the hex, right? This is something like hex we are leaving is this. We don't actually do anything with this variable, but just, to keep things straightforward. And then the new hex is going to be that, and then we set our hex to this new one. I suppose that's not unreasonable. So yeah, so over here, list of hexes to pathfind, or to walk through from Pathfinder. Note, first item is always the hex we are standing in. I mean, it's nice that, like, all we have to do to get this to work is remove the sort of weird kind of hacky, like, we get a hex, but then we immediately dismiss the first item, and then it's a one-liner fix here to DQ and basically throw that away. Again, we don't need to save this. I could just actually do that, because then we won't get any warnings about, you know, a hex we're not, a variable we're not using. So we just throw away that first hex now when it's time to do the move, and then we just peek at the next thing in the list without removing it from the queue. So this means that this should now draw things properly. Well, let's find out. I hit play, select my unit, right-click. Okay, the preview's still looking good. Let go. Now if I click on this unit, it'll show me his current path, which includes starting from here. And if I hit space bar, he should move to this tile. And he does. And because this unit is still selected, which is kind of cool, it updates the path in real time, and then zooms over there, and then spacebar doesn't do anything else. We do get a note about an invalid operation here because we're hitting spacebar to do turn when we in fact have nothing left in the queue. Right. We're not getting that error multiple times though, just the one time, because what's happening here is we get to this do turn with Hexpack having exactly one thing in the list, which is the tile we are currently standing in, which is not the same as having a path. So it's almost like here, if hex path dot count equals 1, the only hex left in the list is the one we are moving to now. Therefore, we have no more path to follow. So let's just clear the queue completely to avoid confusion. So hex path, we're just going to set it to null right now. And there might be a better way to handle this, but this will work. And I don't think it leads to too much confusion. I mean, neither approach in terms of whether or not we leave the first hex on here or not is significantly more or less efficient. It's just a question of what leads to clear a code. There we go, hit space. At no point did we get an error. Excellent. All right, well, I actually thought we'd be able to squeeze in another thing here, but I think it makes sense to cut this episode just a little shorter than some, to leave this clean. Ow! No, you know what? We can do the next thing. The next thing I want to do here is in our hex. Right now, our hex has no idea what its tile type is. Apparently, we left a breakpoint there. It's only hex map that is responsible for setting that, and it's in a really weird and hackish and awkward way in its update hex visuals, which is not what I want to do. As such, we are going to go and make it so that the hexes know their own type, which means they're sort of going to have their own internal awareness of movement cost. Probably is the right thing. I mean, this works. I don't know. Here's the thing. Like, how generic should hexes be is actually a really interesting question, right? So we're tracking the elevation and moisture just in case we want to, like, convert this number to, like, an elevation number, you know, oh, this tile is 1,000 meters high or something like that, just out of interesting stuff. But the thing we really need to know is what is the base type of this unit, right? So we have this temporarily public value over here because we set movement cost in hex map, and I think that's kind of crummy. So I think what we want is some sort of int-based thing. Could be an enum. Well, maybe we'll make an enum for now, and then later on, if we're reading from data files, it can change up. But something like, I think we still need to keep track of two aspects of the tile. Now, in a sense, we could have one value, like some sort of value, just as an argument, an int, that's something like tile type, right? So this is something like plains, grasslands, desert, etc. And then even just a Boolean that is something like, is hill, or some damn thing. Because tile type could even be like mountain, ocean, everything like that. The only gotcha is the question of, is this a hill or not? Because you can have a grasslands hill versus a grasslands just flat surface. I suppose you could even implement it as two separate tile types. You know, you can have something like grassland and another one that's grassland hills. But I think that gets to be kind of cumbersome. Still, I don't think we want just a Boolean here, because in a real sense, in the mechanical function of our game, one of these determines the model we use, and another one determines the sort of texture we apply to it. And it also enables like a little bit of variety. Like, what if you want what mountains weren't supposed to be impassable, and you really wanted to differentiate between one type of mountain from another type of mountain? And so if we keep these separate, then you end up with that sort of situation. So I think that's what we're going to do. And I think we can go ahead and make this like an enum or something like that, so that we can use actual words to describe things. So we'll make a public enum, which is something like tile type. I don't know. I like making my enums all in caps like this. So we'd have plains, grasslands, marsh, maybe, floodplains, desert, and then like lake, ocean. Like, there's a bunch of different types that are possible. We might not use them all right now, but you know, let's just pretend. And then you have another thing that's something like so this is more like terrain type, elevation type, maybe something like that. Terrain type and elevation type. So here you would have flat, hill, mountain, and then like water tiles. You could have like different depth of water tiles, right? Like some deep sea trench or something like that, or some other type of effect. But I think we're going to be good with this. And then what? Yes, a public variable of type terrain type, probably called something like terrain type, which I would say has a public getter and a protected... No. Okay, so we've got a property here. I mean, at this point, this is exactly the same as just a public field, but it opens us up to the idea that something might be different. An interesting question is there a side effect to setting these things, right? And there kind of will be, because we can easily imagine that if you set the elevation type to, say, hill, the side effect will be a change in the movement cost. On the other hand, movement cost might not be something that's hard-coded. Right? Instead, movement cost could be a property with a public getter, not even a setter. It just gets, and it does something like if elevation type is equal to hill, oops, then we, in that case, I know I'm not consistent with my curly braces, sorry. We always return a movement cost of 2. Otherwise, let's see, if elevation type is equal to mountain, or elevation type, well, again, the movement cost changes, right? Like, there's terrain accessibility. So the actual movement cost varies depending on the unit. And we've run into that problem before. Yeah. So the hex, maybe the hex shouldn't have any awareness of its own movement cost in a very real sense. I just remove that completely, and instead it's unit, right, which has this movement cost enter hex, which right now just asks the hex for its base movement cost. Oh, there we go. So we don't need the other thing. So I mean, this could be like the normal movement cost. Okay, so you know what? Let's go ahead with something like that. If elevation type, so this is like this is again going to be the normal. If elevation type equals elevation type dot hill, then return 2. If elevation type is equal to elevation type dot mountain, or elevation type is equal to elevation type dot water, then we return, I guess, minus 99 is what we've been doing. Otherwise, return 1. So this is just, this thing here is returns the most common movement cost for this tile for a typical melee unit or something like that. So now our unit will return this, but we can override this, right? We can say something like, I'll just put this all in comments. Hold on a sec. Let me write it outside of a comment. So something like, if we are a forest or a hill walker, like if we have, you know, lower movement cost for hills, and hex dot elevation type is equal to elevation type dot hill, then instead we, you know, return 1 instead or something like that. This is just going to be some sort of like example of how we might want to handle it. We'd have to do like some overrides and be smart about the terrain type. I think this sort of thing is inevitable. I mean, ultimately the hex.base movement cost might be totally optional. Like we could just movement cost to enter the hex. We assume ourselves it's going to be something like this as opposed to calling on the hex. But I think this is going to be some sort of middle ground that we'll develop later on. It'll be convenient to be able to just ask the hex what its normal base movement cost is. Or we might design some sort of system where we can pass into the hex some sort of list of flags, right? Maybe something like, we could do something like that. Bool is hill walker, which is normally false. Well, you know what? Yeah. Bool is forest walker equals false. Bool is flyer equals false. Again, we could require the defaults or we could just leave them out. You know what? Fuck it. Let's leave them out. Excuse me. My bad. I really try not to curse in these videos. So something like, okay, if is hill walker is equal to false. So if we don't have, let's write it the other way around, because I think, so if this is a hill and we aren't a hill walker, then the movement cost will be 2. If it's a mountain or a water, and let's wrap this in something like this, and is flyer is equal to false, return this. So so things that walk can't cross through mountains or water. And then et cetera, we get to the end. We don't actually track forest walker. We'd also have to do another check first here, because you could have, like, you could be a hill walker, but it could be a forest tile. Although I think in Civ 6, Civ 6 is implemented such that if you've got a scout, and you've got the trait where your scout enters forest tiles for a cost of 1, I think in Civ 6, even forest tiles on hills only cost you 1 to enter, which is much more similar to what we're developing over here. So there's like something like this, you know, and then to do forests, because I don't think we really, we do forest, don't we, in our hex map? Spawn trees. We just create the trees. But at no point does the hex know that it's got trees. So the hex needs something else. It needs some sort of like hex feature value. Public enum feature type. So forest, rainforest, marsh. This is different from a goods, right? Like, it's not dyes, it's not wheat, it's not whatever. It's something that's removable from a tile. I can't remember if there tends to be any of those others. So again, we'll set some sort of public here for feature type. Feature type. Oh, I guess we probably need a none if we're using enums over here. So there we go. So something like that. So it's as simple as saying something like feature type if it's equal to feature type dot forest, and his hillwalker, oops, and hillwalker is false. We do this. Probably what we should do is put like the mountains first, although I don't think the mountains can have a feature, but just for the sake of whatever, we'll do something like that. We could change this around too, so that some of these things might be additive, like a hill with a forest might be, you know, because we could do something like this. Int move cost starts at 1. And then what we could do is something like, instead of returning, we say movement cost, or move cost plus plus. Or to make it more explicit, we'll go plus equals 1. So the movement cost starts at 1. If it's a hill and we're not a hill walker, then we add 1 to the cost. If it's a forest and we're not a forest walker, we add 1 to the cost. This is a different logic than it could be. So this is possible for a movement cost to be 3. And if it's a hill with a forest and we're a forest walker, it still will cost us 2 to enter. Which one is more accurate? I don't know. It depends on what you want for your game. So I think we'll go with something like that. And so now the unit all of a sudden will just pass a bunch of falses. False, false, false. Because right now the unit doesn't have any movement types going on here, right? But we'll obviously, to do, implement different movement traits, something like that. Okay, so we can't compile a run right now because right now our hex visuals is trying to set movement costs, which is obviously bad. Instead, what it's going to have to do is, rather than set a movement cost, it's going to have to tell the hex h dot I guess it's not the feature, but the terrain. Right, this is making jungle. So actually it is feature type. We want to set it to rainforest. And then here it's being set to a regular forest. I guess we don't actually have the movement cost for a rainforest implemented. So it's something like, probably the same thing. If the feature type is forest or the feature type is rainforest. There we go, put those together. So we've got that. Otherwise, we set... oh, the other thing is we set in the material here. H dot terrain type is equal to terrain type dot grasslands. All right, which is what's going on here. Here, let me move this right there, like that. Same thing here. We're gonna just do this, cut that out, just forest, and like that. So forest and rainforest are both gonna exist on grassland type terrain. So here again, we're gonna set terrain. Again, we're gonna want to move some of this code somewhere else because I feel like this function does way too much and it feels kind of awkward. Desert. So yeah, you don't set the movement cost. Instead, you say dot, oh, it's elevation equals dot mountain dot hill dot water. That's just flat, which should be the default. Let me make sure in the hexes here. The very first item in your enum is, I believe, the default. So it'll default the planes, it'll default the flat planes over here, and no feature. Is that what we want? Because it's not really how the world No, I mean, I think that's fine for the hex. In the world generation, we might start with a bunch of water. That's going to be okay. Speaking of... generate map h dot terrain type is equal to ocean. H dot elevation type is equal to water, which means that actually we do have to reset things. So we end up setting the terrain type no matter what, but the elevation we do apparently explicitly have to set to say that it's flat over here. Boom, 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 boom. Okay. Any chance that this compiles at this point, or did we miss anything else? Oops. Oh, nice copy and paste fail. There we go. Do that. Pop out. Cannot oh, I've got different types here. Right, we're setting elevation type here. That's one of the nice things with enums, right? You can't confuse. If these were all just ints, it would be possible that we were writing an int meant to represent an elevation into the int for a terrain type. But with enums, they are type specific, even though internally they're basically implemented like integers. And you can freely convert from one to the other. How's that? An overload for base movement cost takes 0. Oh, this is just for a tooltip. So for our tooltip, we'll display a movement cost assuming no special movement skills. Good. What's the unreachable code in unit? I think we had that before. Right, because this is listed as a const, so it knows that it can never change, so it knows that this code will never run right now, which is okay. Some things aren't used. Yeah, that's okay. So if I hit play here, our world is once again rendering properly. That's excellent. Movement costs are being reported. These are no longer hard-coded in, right? This movement cost is being reported dynamically as a result of its terrain type. And if we select you and try pathfinding stuff, it seems to still be obeying the pathfinding laws. And that looks really good. Okay. Excellent. Very happy about that. All right, so that's going to wrap it up here. Next episode, we're going to fine-tune, I think, the user interface for the unit selection. We want to keep the unit, I think, selected a little bit more. At some point, we also need to make sure when you right-click, so right now, if I select the unit and tell him to move over here, he doesn't move right away. He doesn't move until I hit spacebar, which triggers the sort of do turn, do action kind of thing. But that's obviously not what we want. We want to be able to, assuming our unit has movement, if we click on him and then release over here, he should instantly move up to the limit number of turns that he can possibly do while animating the whole way. I mean, our animation is just a slide here. We don't actually have our character do any sort of walking animation. Not that it would be hard to just trigger that. That would be okay. So we're going to want to factor that in here. So I think I want to improve the UI a little bit just so that he stays a little sticky. Maybe put a little square at his feet. We could also have his, like, height change based on the height of the tile. Different things like that. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Thanks for watching. See you next time.